Hi everybody, I hope that you're all doing well. So today I am back to do my July wrap-up part 2 of all of the books that I read in the second half of July. So as I've mentioned a few times on my channel, my goal for July has really been to whittle down the number of unread books that I still had from pre-lockdown. I really wanted to clear out all of those old TBR books that I'd had on my shelves for a few months and just hadn't gotten around to yet. And I have pretty much managed to do it. I'm still partway through A Fine Balance, and as I've said in a few videos, I've still got War and Peace on the go, but that's going to be a slower reading project over time for me. But I feel really good, feel really fresh. It feels very nice not to have a bunch of old books still on my TBR that I've had for many, many months and in some cases years. However, because of that, I feel like this second half of reading has not been quite as successful as the first half of the month. After having like the big excitement of the first half of July where there were a bunch of 5-star reads and I was very, very excited. Yeah, it's just been kind of an average second half of the month, which I wasn't really too surprised for. Like, I knew that there was a reason why I was putting these books off, but I think it's just a reminder that I am much more of a mood reader, that I can't plan TBRs too far in advance to myself, and I do really just need to go with the flow of what I'm feeling, what book I'm really in the mood to pick up, rather than what I think I had been doing, which was seeing books like in a charity shop or in a bookshop and thinking, oh, I've always heard good things about that, I must pick that up because I will read it at some point, and then it'll sit on my shelf for ages and I'll just feel very guilty, and then I'll pick it up when I'm not ready for it, and that's never good. It's never good. I know lots of people have different attitudes to their TBRs and they're quite happy having like lots of unread books, and I'm not here to discourage that. Just for me personally, I like to have a smaller number of books that I'm just really, really keen to get to. That just works a lot better for me, and I need to keep that in mind when I'm buying books in the future. So I think probably the most well-known book that I read this month, and probably the most contentious in terms of my opinion of it, was East of Eden by John Steinbeck. Now I'm here to say right off the bat, I did not dislike this book. I just do not think that this book is for me. When I mentioned that this was one of my last unread books that was on my TBR pile, I'd had a couple of comments saying, oh, you'll absolutely love John Steinbeck, or East of Eden's such a masterpiece, it's a classic, you'll love it. And I had a feeling that I wouldn't, and I was kind of proven right. I just don't think this kind of like great American novel is really my favourite thing to read. I've read 4 of John Steinbeck's shorter novels, and you know, they were all good. Like, I could understand where the talent was, I could see why people like John Steinbeck so much, but none of them ever blew me away. And it was kind of the same with East of Eden for me. Like, I completely understand why John Steinbeck is so lauded and why so many people say that he's just a classic author that everybody should read, and I do think that you should read some Steinbeck, and I do think it's worth picking this up. And there were so many lines in this where I was like, wow, he's good. However, you know, you've got another 500-600 pages where I was just bored through a lot of it. There were many sections of this for me where it did just drag, the plot just dragged for me, and I did mention this in my Finish-a-thon reading vlog that I don't know how much of this is to do with the setting just doesn't appeal to me, and there's something about these kind of great American novels that are very much, you know, like man living on the land, like the rural landscape, the village, whatever, that having it being its own character and the setting being a very strong element, that it just never does it for me. I don't know why. There's something about rural settings or like village settings that for whatever reason my brain just automatically turns off for. Like, I am much more engaged in city narratives or in school or university narratives. East of Eden's plot is also very much centered around the story of Cain and Abel. I thought that was a very interesting way of structuring the plot and, you know, kind of having some sort of form to this story. However, there were still some moments where I thought the Cain and Abel narrative was just a little bit too ham-fisted, a little bit too heavy-handed. Like, there is an entire section in this where they are talking explicitly about Cain and Abel, and you're just kind of like, do we need this, really? Do we have to be quite so explicit with this analogy? I don't know. Like I say, there are many moments in this where I thought the writing was very poignant, where there were some really great lines. It's just, for me, a shame that I had to go through a lot of sections that just dragged for me. I think you should read it, see what you think of it, but not for me. I'm sorry for not liking this great American novel, please don't hate me. Next up from my TBR, I had Perdita, The Life of Mary Robinson by Paula Byrne. Mary Robinson was an 18th century actress. She played many, many different roles in London, but she was probably most well known for the title role Perdita in The Winter's Tale. She was also well known and kind of notorious for being the mistress of the future King George IV, and also having a relationship with the politician Charles Fox. However, this is not the only side to Mary Robinson. She was also well known for her writing. On the back of the book, you've even got a quote from Coleridge where he said that she was a woman of undoubted genius, the most interesting woman of her age. However, she's not a figure that I think is very well known in popular culture. I think if you are very much into your 18th century, you most likely have heard of Mary Robinson, but she's not a very well-known figure, and certainly not for her writing. But she was a very prolific writer. She wrote poems and plays and essays and all sorts of different things. She was a very well-educated, astute woman. She was well known within these social circles for being very witty. People commented on her wit just as much as they commented on how fashionable and beautiful she was. She was a very interesting historical figure to get to spend a bit of time with, and I think if you have previously read things like Georgiana, Duchess of Devonshire, then you might want to pick this up because she was a contemporary of Georgiana. In fact, Georgiana was actually one of her biggest patrons. Georgiana's circle would often provide clothes for Mary Robinson to wear on stage, because that was a very done thing, was for these wealthy women to give their clothes to these actresses. And hilariously, it was often regardless of whatever character the actress was meant to be playing. You'd often see these actresses who were meant to be playing servants but were absolutely decked out in these very fancy clothes. And yeah, I generally did quite enjoy this. I'd say if anything, there are often like big chunks of writing and analysis of pieces of her writing that are just kind of dumped in this book just unceremoniously, which I think might slow the pace down for some people and put them off. But yeah, definitely an interesting life. It's probably not my favourite biography that I've ever read, but I'm glad that I did pick it up. Another biography that I read in the second half of this month was The Favourite, which is the biography of Sarah, Duchess of Marlborough by Ophelia Field. This chronicles the life of Sarah, Duchess of Marlborough, who is probably most well known for being the favourite of Queen Anne, who people are probably most aware of through the movie The Favourite, which starred Olivia Colman and Rachel Weisz. I thought Sarah's life was very interesting to read about. It was especially interesting to see her relationship with Queen Anne develop, particularly for her relationship with her before she became the Queen. How their relationship was developing, their dynamic was developing through letters when they were younger, when they were both getting married and trying to have families. Famously, Queen Anne very sadly had 17 children who she lost, either through miscarriage, stillbirths, or they died very young in childhood. And these tragedies all took place before she became queen and obviously had such a major, devastating impact on her life and her mental well-being. I thought what was really interesting was how the Duchess of Marlborough had such a massive impact on how people saw Queen Anne, how they perceived her, both in life but also because Sarah lived 30 years after Queen Anne died, and she had a massive impact on how people came to see her after she died. People seeing her as being very silly and not very effective, and it was only really in the 20th century that that perception has started to shift. Sarah, Duchess of Marlborough is like a very interesting case study because she lived through so much history. She lived during the reigns of multiple monarchs. She lived during the Great Fire of London, the Glorious Reformation. She lived during the tenure of the first Prime Minister, Robert Walpole, and had quite a bad relationship with him, to put it mildly. She was born under the reign of Charles II and then died during George II's reign, so she had quite a long life and saw a lot of history. I think maybe where this book might fall down for me was that it maybe was a little bit too long, and also it is chronicling a period of history which, as we know, I am not that fond of. That being the 17th century and the Stuart monarchs, which is just, I don't know why. It's another thing that my brain kind of turns off at, but meh. I can't quite explain it. It's something that I just need to deal with and get over and just keep on exposing myself more to. But I think if you are interested, if you enjoyed the film, it's definitely worth picking this up and seeing the differences between the film and the actual history. So that's what I have to say about that. So next up in terms of reading, I got to the point last week where I was just feeling a little bit meh. A little bit uninspired. I'd had like 3 books back to back that were only kind of like 3-star-ish, 2.5, 3-star-ish. I'd had 1 DNF because I ended up actually DNFing Bridge of Clay by Marcus Zuzak because I just could not get into that for the life of me. I was also just like not feeling that great last week. I wasn't ill or anything, I just felt very, very fatigued all day, and I decided that what I needed was like something fun. I needed like a little palate cleanser, something different to kind of like take the edge off all of these like biographies and modern classics. So I decided to go for a fun audiobook, and the one that I went for was Red, White and Royal Blue by Casey McQuiston, which is a book that I've been wanting to get to for ages, and it was on Scribd, so I was like, now is the time. I need this. I need it now. So this is one that I know has been getting quite a bit of buzz on BookTube because it is basically the idea of what if the first son, the son of the President of the United States, ended up having a relationship with a Prince of England. And I feel like just from that premise alone, you understand fully what you're getting yourself into. It is basically fan fiction, and I enjoyed every second of it. I mentioned that I was reading this on Instagram, and I had a couple of people asking me to let me know whether or not I liked it, because apparently the consensus is that Americans seem to really, really enjoy it, and then a lot of the criticism that's been levelled at it has come from British readers, which I can kind of understand. It does cater to a lot of British stereotypes, but I kind of feel like they're the things that if you've been on the internet for any length of time, like, you know a lot of the stereotypes that Americans have of British people, and especially of the royal family. Like, within the first 10 minutes of the audiobook, the royal family had been referred to as products of incest, and I was just like, oh, we're going there, are we? There are certain things that, like, as a British reader or listener, you just kind of have to turn your brain off to. Like, the British accent that the narrator uses for Prince Henry is just something else. It's just, it is the stereotypical, like, very posh RP British accent, and you're just like, what is this? There's multiple references where the prince will joke about throwing him into the dungeon, and it's like, I don't think anybody has ever threatened that in the 21st century ever. There's this moment where the president's son is really, really shocked that Prince Henry is into Star Wars, because he didn't think that the royal family would be into popular culture, and, like, apparently the royal family are not allowed to show that they're into popular culture, and you're like, what? Really? Is this really what you think the royal family are like? There's a mention of how one of the princesses wanted to play guitar, and, like, she was allowed to play guitar, but the official story was that she was learning how to play the violin because it's more proper for her to play the violin than the guitar. And I'm just like, it's the 21st century, guys. What are you doing? There's quite a few ham-fisted references to British culture. So, like, she'll just throw in, oh, he was eating cornettos or Jaffa cakes. One of the things that I joked about on Instagram that really annoyed me was that they insulted beans on toast within the first hour of the audiobook, and I was just like, I don't understand what you guys' issue is with beans on toast. I'm starting to get the impression that Americans don't know what actual British beans on toast is, and this is the only explanation I have for the constant slander of beans on toast. Like, what is wrong with you? Beans on toast is delicious. Also, when I talked about it on Goodreads, I said there was one line in this book that almost gave me an aneurysm, and the line was, Philip broke a vase that once belonged to Anne Boleyn. And once again, I do not have the mental energy to go into all of the historic wrong in that sentence, but there are many reasons why that could not be a thing that happened. You kind of get the impression that Casey McQuiston did not do that much research into the royal family and into protocol or into British culture aside from stereotypes when you're reading it. But aside from that, I did generally really, really enjoy it. I gave it 5 stars. It was just exactly the pick-me-up that I needed. It's just a lot of fun, and the love story's really cute. I mean, the main character is canonically named after Alexander Hamilton, and there's a section where the two of them are discussing whether or not Remus Lupin was canonically bisexual, and I'm just kind of there like, this is what I needed. I needed this. This was just good fun. It's also just really, really funny, and there is a scene in this book with a PowerPoint presentation that just had me in absolute hysterics all the way through. Yeah. I really, really like this book. Sometimes, like, a fun, cute little romance is exactly what you need. And I think it does just go to show that enjoyment and ratings are completely subjective. Because, like, yes, technically, was East of Eden a better written book? Is it a better book? Yeah, totally, absolutely. But did I enjoy Red, White and Royal Blue much more than I did East of Eden? Once again, yes, absolutely. So that's why that got 5 stars and this didn't. And then last but not least, of course, I finished Middlemarch by George Eliot. This was a book that I was reading as part of Claire Fenby's Middlemarch along, where we were reading Middlemarch through the month of July. And just so you know, Claire has also made the decision to extend Middlemarch along for August. So if you are interested in picking up Middlemarch, you've still got time. You've got the rest of August to read it as well, and that is definitely enough time to read it in if you want to pick it up. For myself, I did want to try and get this done in July, and the way that I did it was by reading 3 chapters a day, and I'm really glad that I did take it at that slower pace rather than trying to read it in one big go. I think it is a book that really benefits from, like, slowly poring over it over time rather than reading it in big chunks. I feel like Kieran's totally gonna think I'm throwing shade at him by talking about reading it in big chunks. I'm not throwing shade at you, Kieran. Or am I? But no, I think because the alternate title to Middlemarch is a study of provincial life, you are following these characters in this town, and there is a wasp outside. Sorry, I got distracted. There was a wasp outside. I think because you are following this cast of characters through their everyday lives in this little village of Middlemarch, I think it's a book that really suits being read slowly over time, because it kind of feels like you are reading at pace with how these characters are living their day-to-day lives. I think it really helps you in trying to get to know these characters, because there is a lot of characters to kind of pin down and understand the personalities of. Within this book, you've got multiple storylines and multiple plot threads going on, so I think reading it and digesting it slowly is the way to go. And I think this is an interesting book because there are many different topics that it covers and different themes that you can latch onto. And I think for me particularly, the ideas around education and particularly women's education was something I really latched onto. If you've been on the Discord server and been interacting on there, you'll definitely have seen me kind of popping up every now and then and being like, here's a line about education. Particularly me ranting about Mr. Brooke, who is a character who has a very low opinion of women trying to get an education, and you'll see me being like, Mr. Brooke! For example, one choice line from Mr. Brooke is, but there is a lightness about the feminine mind, a touch and go, the music, the fine arts, that kind of thing. They should study those up to a certain point, women should, but in a light way, you know. And I was just kind of sat reading like, did I even ask for your opinion, Mr. Brooke? Another Brookeism was, yes, but not my style of woman. I like a woman who lays herself out a little more to please us. There should be a little filigree about a woman, something of the coquette. A man likes a sort of challenge. The more of a dead set she makes at you, the better. Once again, did I even ask for your opinion, Mr. Brooke? No, I did not. This book is particularly concerned with marriage and having like the right attitude and mindset and kind of being aware of yourself before you commit to marrying somebody. Because of course when this book is set, like divorce is almost non-existent, separating is heavily looked down upon, and yet you have a lot of characters in this book who kind of rush into marriage, often to their detriment. And I feel like George Eliot was trying to make a commentary on, you know, trying to like know yourself more before you make this kind of commitment, and trying to be a bit more self-aware, and not only being self-aware and aware of your own foibles and personality, but also, you know, trying to get to know your partner a little bit more before you commit to them. I think this particularly stuck into my head because there is a great scene right at the beginning of the book where the two sisters, Dorothea and Cecilia, are looking through a jewellery box. They are sharing out different pieces of jewellery that they've inherited, and Cecilia is like picking up all of these different pieces and she's admiring them. Dorothea, on the other hand, has this image of herself as being like very aesthetic. She has this idea of herself that she is not interested in material things and that she has this very stoic existence, but you can tell whilst reading it that she's very intrigued by these pieces of jewellery, that she wants to pick some of them up, but she's not letting herself. And Cecilia knows this. She sees her sister kind of struggling with this and she knows that she wants it. But because Dorothea has told herself so often that I am the kind of person who doesn't wear lots of jewellery and I do not like material things, and that's how I've told everybody that I am, she's denying herself. She's not very self-aware of what her actual personality is, and that comes back to bite her on the bum later when she marries a man because of his ideals and the kind of marriage that she thinks that she's going to have with him, and the reality is that it's something else entirely. She is not suited to a life with this man. I feel like I always come to classics wanting to try and find some sort of lesson that we can take as a modern reader, and I think that idea of trying to be a bit more in tune with your own personality and your own needs before you make these big hasty decisions like getting married, I think that is definitely something that a modern reader could take from this. Like I say, because of the nature of Middlemarch, there are so many different plots and different characters, and there are so many different themes that there is, I think, something that you could hit upon in Middlemarch and really respond to. I did really enjoy reading Middlemarch. I'm really glad that I have gotten to it. I wouldn't say that this is an absolute favourite classic for me, and I can definitely agree with a lot of people who were reading this alongside me who found that it was dragging. I think because, you know, it isn't a very plot heavy book. It is the study of provincial life. It is very much like a village focused day-to-day story. But what I will say is that it does feel very real. The things that happen feel very much like everyday life. The characters feel like people you might know. You know, there aren't these grand like mustache twirling villains or anything like that. It is what I would say is quite an accurate depiction of day-to-day life in this time period. And I think you probably would know from that kind of description whether or not this is a classic that will appeal to you. I'm glad I read it. I did enjoy it. I can definitely see why people say that this is a masterpiece. It's just not an absolute favourite book of all time for me. So yes, those are all of the books that I have read in the second half of July. I will pop down below for you the books that I read at the beginning of July. Those were slightly more successful for me. There were more 5 stars there. So if you want to see me getting very excited, particularly about Empress Matilda and going on a bit of a rant about her life, then that's down for you there. Do let me know some of the books that you read. Did you participate in Middlemarch Long? Did you enjoy the book? Do let me know. I'd love to hear from you. I hope that you're having a fantastic, fantastic day, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Thanks. Bye.